Welcome to part 14 of Learn Go. In this video, we're going to be going over variadic functions. So very simply, variadic functions are simply functions that take an arbitrary number of arguments as input. And we'll be looking at how to define our own variadic functions. But before we do that, I want to point out that a function we've used in just about every video so far in this series, the printline function, is an example of a variadic function. So I'm going to put a comment. Printline is an example of a variadic function. And why is that? Well, if we go ahead and try to run printline and put in an arbitrary number of inputs, let's just say a couple here, this, comma, is, comma, and example, and I could of course keep going, I'm putting in an arbitrary number of string inputs here, and each one of these inputs are going to be taken into the function and they'll be displayed on the terminal when we run this program, and each one of the arguments will be separated by a single white space. So I'll go ahead and run this just to verify that is the case. So it's go run 14 underscore variadic functions.go. And if we do that, we go ahead and we see this is an example output to the screen. So now let's go ahead and see how we can define a variadic function of our own in Go. So let's go up here to the top, and the way that we do that is going to be very similar to defining just a regular function, as we've seen in a previous video, but with one key difference. So we use the func keyword just as we did before, and we're going to define a function that takes in an arbitrary number of integer values, and it's going to multiply all those integer values together. So we'll call this function mult, and then the way that we specify the arguments for a variadic function is we give the input a name, and then we follow that by 3 dots or an ellipsis, and that's to denote that this is indeed a variadic function that will take an arbitrary number of arguments, and then we give the type for what those arguments should be. In this case, we'll say it's an int, and then we'll also specify the return type as we usually do for any function. We'll say that's an int as well because we're just multiplying numbers together, and then inside of this function we'll go ahead and put in the logic. So we'll put a variable here. We'll say total equals 1, and we'll have a loop that will just range through the nums and then basically just continually multiply those nums as we encounter them in the loop. So we'll say for underscore, because we don't necessarily care about the index in this case, comma, num, and we'll range over nums. And inside of this loop, all we're going to do is we're just going to say total times equals num. So we're just constantly multiplying the total every time we encounter a number in this loop, and we're just multiplying that with the total. So if you haven't seen this notation before, I think this is the first time I've actually used that in this series of Go videos. This is really just a shorthand for total is equal to total times num. So that's just a shorthand if you're not familiar with this times equal notation. So after this loop, after we've done the loop, we're just going to return total, and that will be the end of the function. So now let's go ahead and go down to our main function and try to call this function and see what we get. So let's go ahead and call mult function with as many values as necessary. So we'll just feed it a few to show the example here. So we'll say format.println, and then inside of this print line we'll just print out what the mult function returns. So we'll say mult, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll see what 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 is. So we'll write that, run it, and if we do that, let's see. So I believe I forgot to put a equal sign here before the range. So this of course requires colon equals. I think I'm thinking in terms of Python, so sorry about that. So I put that back in there. That should fix the problem. Let's go ahead and run this and write it again. So 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 is 24. Cool. So we can also apply variadic functions to slices. So variadic functions can also be applied to slices. So let's just go ahead and define a slice that's a set of integers. So we'll say nums equals int, because we're defining a slice of integers, and then we'll just go ahead in these curly braces and just pop a few integers in here. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've defined a slice in this way, and then we'll call our multiplication function on this slice. So we'll do so in the same way, where we'll just call the printline function on that function, and then whatever is returned will be printed out. So we'll say format.println, and then we'll say mult, and the way that we pass in nums in this case is we say nums ... So if we do that, run the function again, run the code again, I think I spelled mult wrong, so I flipped up the L and the T. Let's try that again. And if we do that, we get the same answer here because we put in the same input for the slice as we did for the arbitrary values here. So that pretty much does it for variadic functions. If you have any questions or comments or anything like that, don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section below. The code, as always, will be hosted on my GitHub, and there will be a link in the description to this video. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day.